It's just an odd setup, I'm not used to.
The classrooms are always, yeah.
Okay, so we're recording, so we can go ahead and start.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's open forum. It's my privilege to announce Nicolyn Woodcock is visiting us today for an interview on site, and she's being interviewed for the assistant director's position for the Asian Native American Center. So without further ado, I welcome Nicolyn, and please tell us more about what you have for us today in your presentation.
Thank you. Now you make sure that this is.
Oh, we have the monitor chat, never mind, I'm over here.
So this is not a.
Is it not working?
When I hit it, it's not, but I don't know.
Let's see here.
Now
let's
it's in
see.
PowerPoint presentation mode. Is it a Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, or is it something that you plugged in?
We plugged it in.
You might have to take it
Let
out
me
and
turn it
plug
off
it back
again.
in.
Try clicking on the
We'll try.
PowerPoint just once. I'll try it.
Perfect. There we go. Okay. All right. So we've got that all working. Okay. So thank you all so much for being here for the session this afternoon and for the invitation to come do the interview. I've had such a good time talking with everyone who I've talked to this morning and everyone who I've sort of just bothered in the past 20 minutes as well. And those of you I haven't had a chance to talk to yet, I look forward to starting some conversations with you here. So what I'll be talking about today is recruiting, supporting, and retaining Asian and Native American students. And I guess we'll just dive in. So, do I need to point at this?
You should just be able to click
Nope,
as you
just click
walk,
on it.
yeah.
It's not
No.
advancing. I don't know what we did
Okay,
that
try
made
it.
it work
There we
before. Okay. I have my land acknowledgement. Today we are occupying the homelands of the Session, Hopewell, Adena, Maiamia, and Shawnee peoples. This acknowledgement is among our first steps in educating ourselves and our communities about the painful histories of genocide and forced removal from this territory by which this institution was built. Our commitment to such learning must as well reckon with the ongoing legacies of that history, which is not past but continues to cause harm for Indigenous communities in the present. So learning and reckoning with these truths is an essential component to recognizing, honoring, and living in community with the many and diverse Indigenous people who are here now and always. And so this is, of course, one of the key jobs of the ANA Center, and something that I hope we're all ready for, right? And working toward. So a little bit about me. I know a lot of you heard this spiel already, and some of you will be hearing it for the first time. But my name is Nicolyn Woodcock. I use she, her pronouns. Right now, I am assistant professor of English at Medaille University in Buffalo, New York. I teach broadly multi-ethnic American literature. My training is in Asian American literature and Asian American studies, and so that's one of the reasons that I was encouraged to apply for the job here at the center. I also have a pretty strong background at this point in critical race and ethnic studies, and I did concentrations both for my undergrad and graduate work in women's and gender studies. So a lot of the things that we do in the center and collaborate and do together in the Culture and Identity Centers, I've sort of been in those conversations, right? I'm Filipino American, I'm mixed race as well, and a first generation college graduate. I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, but I went to Miami University in Oxford, so I have been in this area. It feels like I spent like my formative years in Southwest Ohio, and when I imagine returning to come back to Ohio, this is where I would like to be. So that also was one of the things that encouraged me to apply when I saw the job open. So outside of the classroom, I do have a lot of administrative experience that I think is going to inform what I bring to the center as much, if not a little bit more, than the work I've done as a faculty member. So right now there's an administrative component to my job. I'm the program director for English, which is housed within an interdisciplinary humanities department. And we have the only sort of standalone bachelor's degree in the department. Otherwise, students sort of design their own major in liberal arts. And so I've been doing that since August, it's not ideal timing to leave them in the middle of the school year after just starting, but I didn't want to pass up an opportunity to sort of live the life I want to live, right, in the place I want to do it. So we will figure out what happens at Medaille if we have to. I will probably talk a lot today about the work I did as a graduate associate for Miami University's Humanities Center. I did that for 3 years before I had to stop and write my dissertation. And then I also will probably talk quite a bit about the alumni volunteer work I do with Kenyon College. I've been a mentor in the Alumni of Color Mentoring Initiative since 2015. Which is an extension of the peer-to-peer mentoring program that they have on campus. I served in 2020 to 21. I served on a task force that the Alumni and Parent Engagement Office put together to sort of figure out how they can much better reach out to alumni of color and engage them with the college, and really to do that in more ways than asking them for money. Probably as a result of what I was doing on there, someone nominated me to be on Alumni Council, and I agreed to the nomination and have been serving on the council since 21, and have 2 more years in my initial appointment with them. And then I've also volunteered in whatever capacities there are to mentor and connect with students of color. I tend to volunteer in them. And one of those was Colorado College's first gen collegiate program. I was a faculty mentor in that for the year that I was there in my visiting job. For the presentation, the rest of the presentation, I've sort of broken it down into 3 areas that I think are important to the recruitment and retention efforts and for fostering community for WSU students and I guess beyond students, faculty and staff as well. And so those 3 areas are visibility and name recognition for the center, building tangible connections across all levels, and protecting institutional knowledge and memory. And then toward the end of the presentation, I will come back to category 1 and talk about communications strategies and programming ideas, which lots of people have asked me questions about programming, and I think that's what y'all are excited to hear about, so I'm planning to end on that. So to start, building visibility and name recognition, I think I think this is kind of a ranked list. The top 4 things are really the foundation of what we need to have, and one of the things that's already done is that there is a physical space. And I heard from Dr. Cheney, and then students at lunch were telling me that the physical space is actually changing and will actually be in a more central and visible part of campus. And so that's really exciting that there is already a physical space. When I worked for the Humanities Center, people constantly asked me where it was, and unfortunately we didn't have a space. We just had a job of sort of organizing things together, right? And then we want to make it a priority for that space to be a welcoming atmosphere for students, that is not just the place where the staff works. It sounds like that's already the vibe of the space, and we want to continue to have that vibe, right? And then for recruitment and retention, right? Being present at any kind of things that are happening on campus to make sure that you know, whether it's the staff, the students, that we are there, that we have some kind of presence at these, you know, open houses. I hear there's an open house this weekend, and then, you know, other kinds of activities, fairs, welcome week, orientation, all those things, homecoming, any kind of campus-wide events that we have some kind of presence at those, because those are the kinds of things that prospective students and their families are attending. Alumni are attending those and bringing their families, and those are prospective students too. And you know, sometimes a prospective student is like a 5-year-old child, so you just start those relationships early and get them to sort of recognize and be excited about Wright State, because they know that this space is here for them when they're ready for it. Another part of this is, of course, amplifying the visibility of the student organizations that are affiliated with the center. As we amplify what they're doing, it amplifies what we're doing as a center, right? And so to constantly sort of be working together on those things. Having a comprehensive communication strategy, and this is really kind of my bread and butter. That's what they hired me to do at the Humanities Center. And if you read my letter, you heard me sort of humbly bragging about how their attendance rates almost doubled by the end of that school year. I started in August, and by the end of that school year, our attendance rates had doubled between the first and the second semester. And even we saw a rise of almost 30% in the first year of people applying for like opportunities that the center hosted, because we were getting more nominations and we were getting just more people knew about what we were doing, and so followed up with it. And then collaborative, informal, and asynchronous programming, and some signature programming. And I'm going to talk about these last 3 things I have saved for the end of the presentation, so I will talk more about those then. As I said, I think that these top 4 things are the foundation. And so one of the strategies for visibility and name recognition for me is going to be to make sure that we're shoring up the foundation, assessing sort of what's happening already and what needs to happen to make sure that that foundation is really strong, because the success of these depends so much on all of this being in place, and being consistent, which is my next strategy. Consistency is going to be key. And for me, consistency, it doesn't just mean that we're having programming regularly. It also means that all year round we are being seen. We don't want to just be visible as Asian or Native American students, faculty, staff, during those times of year that we are already really hyper visible, which is the Heritage Months and the holidays like Indigenous Peoples Day or Lunar New Year, and so on. Nor do we want to be really visible only when there are issues, whether they're on campus or whether they're happening nationally. And so I want to sort of figure out how do we do that. And then we want well-rounded programming that is balancing between these multicultural celebrations that everyone is sort of happy, excited to come to, but also, you know, educational type events and community building events that are going to support connections among the students, right, within these respective groups, Asian and Asian American and Native students, but also programming that's going to build connections and coalition across communities of color on this campus. And then programming that's going to engage with the broader WSU community and beyond it. I amended the PowerPoint like 30 minutes ago, and I saw this flyer on one of the bulletin boards that I walked by today. And this is what I sort of think about when I imagine what a balanced programming looks like, right? So there are plenty of events on here for the Latino Center. This all of this is this semester, right? That are the sort of like fun, celebratory, etc. But also there are several in here that to me look like they're going to be educational. And there are some that are for the students themselves, and some that are for the broader community, as well as you know, like engagement with the broader Latino community in Dayton. And so this is the kind of balance that I think is a really great model, and to, you know, collaborate with the Latinx Center to sort of figure out how we do that too at the ANA Center is something that I can sort of see happening. Which I guess segues into the second group of things, which is those tangible connections across all levels. So on campus, we want to make sure that among students, faculty, and staff, there are connections. And then, of course, between all of the culture and identity centers, and it does sound like that's already very much happening, and so to just keep going with that. connections with the academic programs, and then, of course, across the Student Affairs Division with admissions, Career Center, Res Life, and I could name many, many more offices, but don't have enough space to put them all on the PowerPoint. And then, of course, beyond campus, I think it's important to build strong alumni networks. And I talked to a couple of students who are graduating this year, right? And so we want to make sure they don't just go off and disappear, that there are still connections for them for the students who are still here, right? To be able to form. And then potentially some kind of Friends of the Center network. I think both of these, alumni and Friends of the Center, become really important networks if you have to do any kind of fundraising. That they, not only can they be donors, but also that they can connect you to people beyond themselves who could become donors, right? And then, of course, community partnerships. And then in a couple of conversations today, I talked about making sure that we have some connections with the nearby colleges and universities. One of the great things about Ohio is that Ohio is relatively small, and from here, within an hour, you have schools as big as Ohio State and schools as small as Antioch, and you've got something like Miami's Miami Center that you can make connections with. And so for student populations that they feel very small and can sort of feel isolating on a campus that is this big, you can make that community feel bigger by connecting them, by connecting students across these schools, faculty and staff across these schools as well. And Eliza, you mentioned this interest in some kind of tribal council, right, of among schools in Southwest Ohio, and that's something that doesn't exist yet and can be built, and we just have to start asking people to do the work with us, right? So to make those kinds of connections. One of the things that I am most interested in is mentoring, and mentoring would be a huge part of this. And so I talked extensively with Dr. Cheney this morning about formalizing programs that are going to foster mentoring relationships at all levels. I've been part of peer-to-peer organizations. I've also now been part of these alumni to current student organizations, and I think it works when you have both, not just one or the other, and then also that we have to formalize some mentoring programs that are going to connect faculty and staff to students as well, because that's one way to advertise what faculty are doing in their classrooms, and that they're here in the first place, and that to get students interested in what they're doing and registering for their classes, but to also make connections, you know, when you are that senior who has no room in your schedule to take some class that doesn't fit into your major, but you can still have that connection with a faculty member or a staff member or whoever. And then I have participated in many kinds of mentoring programs, and I find that the ones that work best are ones that do foster both one-to-one partnership, mentorships, where you sort of pair people, but also ones that do some kind of, or allow for some kind of cluster mentoring to happen, where organic relationships can be formed, because we have maybe all been in this situation where you get paired with a mentor and you don't click with that mentor. And then sometimes it just sort of is like, well, I'm not going to answer their text, or I'm just not going to reach out to them, and it sort of falls by the wayside. But with cluster mentoring, it creates these opportunities where people sort of feel connected to each other and start sort of in an informal way becoming mentors and mentees. And I think cluster mentoring also really recognizes that everyone has something to learn. It's not just sort of the older and wiser people mentoring the younger people who are emerging out into the world. That you know, as we get older, we still have a lot to learn as well. So we can sort of all mentor each other. And this is a way that I feel like I have made, like in the alumni program at Kenyon, for example, I think just by going to those events and meeting the other alumni, I feel like I have gained new mentors in that process. People who graduated 2-3 decades before I did, and I never had a chance to meet when I was a student. So one thing that I think works for that is to make sure that we have the space and opportunity for that organic connection to form. And so So just one idea is to make sure that there's like at least once a month, some kind of informal gathering for students, faculty, and staff to just come together. And so an example that I'm thinking of is when I was at Colorado College, the first gen program, we did a first Thursday lunch just at the dining hall, and everyone just brought their lunch to one of the private dining rooms at the dining hall, and it was just, you know, an hour for us to just chat with each other, catch up, and so on. And then they also did a third Thursday dessert happy hour, which was I think at like 4:30 in the afternoon. And so by having it at a different time, you sometimes captured a different audience than was able to come to the lunch. And they did a speaker at the happy hour who sort of just told a little 5 to 7 minute spiel about their journey as a first generation student. The beginning of the year, it was faculty and staff who gave those. But then in the second semester, it was all seniors who were graduating who gave the speeches. And so that was a really nice way to sort of, I don't know, create some kind of through line in terms of mentorship. And so those are some ideas for mentoring. Now, what have we done? Okay, the third area, protecting institutional knowledge and memory. This was something I was already thinking about before I even got here, and then in conversation with everybody today, I found out quite a bit about the history of the center and that the last few years have been really difficult in terms of just the center being in a lot of transition since Wen's retirement, and so this is something that I have been on the student end of this experience before, with assistant directors or people sort of leaving, and then it taking a while to find the right person to fill the job, right? And so from day one, I think it's really important to make sure that we're building processes so that vertical and horizontal knowledge transmission is really smooth, so that when you do experience the turnover of staff, or you're just onboarding new student workers, or whatever it is, that the primary job of serving the students doesn't have to sort of be put on pause or suffer in any way, that can all happen smoothly. And it is much harder to sort of do that process at the end. So I think about when I was leaving the Humanities Center, we knew I had the dissertation fellowship, and we had about 6 months where we could sort of hire the next grad assistant, and then over the summer I was able to train them. But I had to sort of think back over 3 years on all the jobs that I did and sort of think about, what do we put in this training manual for the next person? And that was really hard. And so I think starting to document that from day one, so that that's an easier process at the end, no matter how long it has taken. And so to make sure that we are capturing whatever institutional memory is here, right? I know that you worked for a very long time in the Anna Center, so we want to capture everything that you know and make sure that it's part of our documentation process and good filing systems. And you want to make sure that you're doing the same thing in the student organizations. I talked with you all about this at lunch, that we never want a situation where everyone graduates and then that student organization just kind of no longer exists, right? We set up leadership so that someone is always ready to take over and keep it running. And I guess this is not a question, I didn't ask this question earlier. I know several of you are on the ANA Council, and I don't know if this is the same thing as the advisory board that I'm imagining, but I've been pushing for an advisory board at Kenyon for their Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, because they're in the same situation. They have a director who's been there for 22 years, and I think he's either on the brink of retiring or getting a job like yours as a vice president or some kind of chief diversity officer at another school. And then we don't know what's going to happen when he leaves, and that's why I've been pushing to make sure we have some kind of advisory board so that the people he knows, the stuff that he knows, that is somehow going to be captured. So some kind of advisory board that includes current students, faculty, and staff, but also alumni and community partners, to sort of help with all of these kinds of transitions that could happen at any time. Okay, so now we're back to one. And so I will talk a little bit about website and social media, the communication strategy. It is important, I think, to make sure that we are having, oh no, I'm supposed to talk about the website first. So I think it is important to, this is actually not on my slides at all. It's important to have, be in people's inbox once a week minimum. And so some kind of newsletter or some kind of events digest of just what is coming up on campus, what do you need to be looking forward to from the ANA Center, even if it means that we're advertising other people's events and not our own on some weeks, but just so that we're on people's radar at least once a week. And then of course the website, we want to make sure there is a lot of great information on the website. But whenever I'm looking at something, I also am thinking like, what else? What else do people want to see there? What are people hoping to find when they come to this site? And one thing that I personally would have loved to see and was some kind of welcome or greeting, not just here's the mission statement, but some kind of thing that's going to draw me in, right? Whether that's a welcome from the assistant director, or I think what would be even better is a welcome from students, because I think, especially prospective students, that's who they want to hear from, is you, because they can then imagine being on that other end if they're at the beginning of whatever pipeline this is. And then some information on there that's going to connect prospective students as well as new students or students who have sort of maybe been here for a while but have only now become interested in figuring out what's going on with their identity, to be able to connect them to faculty and staff information, the people that they could be in community with, as well as any relevant courses that are here. We talked this morning in the search committee about how, there are courses in ethnic studies happening in your departments, and they're mostly happening for your majors. Other departments, majors may not even know about them, even if they could enroll in them. And so we put this information out there, and maybe more people will have it. And then of course, up-to-date information about your upcoming events. I saw there's a page with scholarship information, but it didn't have deadlines on it. So even adding those deadlines is going to be helpful. And then how to join our mailing list. And if we don't already have a mailing list, how we make a mailing list. And then for social media, there has to be 1 to 2 things every week, even through the summer, for people to engage with. It really cannot function merely for advertising. And it is really hard, though, to maintain social media accounts, to sort of the creative energy to post on it every week and to engage with people. Because not only do you have to post, but you do have to sort of engage back when other people engage with the post, right? And that can take up an unpredictable amount of time. But a few ideas for some of that weekly content. This is a screenshot of an Instagram page that's at Colorado College CC Asian Voices. A group of students actually started this in one of as a class project, and I think that was in 2019, and it just keeps getting handed off to a new student to sort of moderate it, and now it's been 3-4 years. And so every week they just post, they have 3 posts, but they start with a photo of someone. So most of these are students. But at the beginning of the year, they often profile faculty and staff, or they'll profile the student organizations, and they'll start with one picture that's kind of current day picture, and then they get to choose 2 other pictures related to them, and then they sort of tell a story about themselves with these 3 posts. And so it always looks like, whenever you come to the page, it looks like this. So you get to see sort of all 3 of them. It looks incredibly organized by making sure that everyone has 3. So that's a model that can be useful. It doesn't have to be its own dedicated page like this, but it could be every other week we profile somebody, right? Or we profile a student org or a faculty member or whatever it is. You also can just follow trends, right? Like the Throwback Thursday hashtag. that has been circulating for years. And so maybe that's something we use to highlight the history of the center, history of WSU or the area that is pertinent to our concerns in the center. The other thing about social media is to make sure we're understanding the target audiences and which social media platforms our target audiences are actually using. I saw that there's a Facebook, a Twitter, and an Instagram, and I know those were all the things that we were all using once upon a time, but now that every day I think I hear about a new social media platform, and I just don't know which ones our students and our prospective students especially are using. And it's going to be student workers who probably know best which ones people are on, but also the best ways to use those. And I don't know if I'm saying that the center has to get a TikTok, but maybe the center has to get a TikTok. I don't know. This is a question for you guys. You help with that, right? So we just have to know, which platforms to use and how do we use them well. So that's social media. Here are some of the ideas for collaborative and informal programming. And I borrowed one of last year's events as an example. But of course, to collaborate with the campus community to make sure that we're having programming during these high visibility times, right? So open houses, admitted students, any kind of weekends where admitted students come here in the spring, new student orientation and move-in, this kind of welcome week that usually happens, family weekend, homecoming, to make sure that even if we're not having formal programming ourselves, to make sure that we're out there visible and at the very least having some kind of informal programs. And then collaboration with the other culture and identity centers to make sure we're maximizing across all of our events. And because I mentioned this earlier, that we are often drawing on the same student populations. We want the same people to be attending our events, and so we got to make sure that we're not giving them too many options, right? And more options than they can actually manage. So to do that kind of collaboration, and of course that is already happening. It happened last year, right? And I'm sure it's happening this year too. Coordinate with academic departments about co-curricular opportunities. So, and I have not seen any new information about this, but when I was in grad school, Miami and Wright State took turns hosting this race, class, gender, and sexuality symposium, which I believe came out of the WGS department. I don't know how COVID may have disrupted that flow of things, because 2020 was the last time I saw any information about this. But to make sure that the center is also involved whenever that's being hosted on this campus, or involved in the logistics of making sure that our students can attend it if Miami's the one hosting it, right? And then things like workshops that support applying for scholarships and research opportunities for students. And then sometimes it's just as simple as coordinating some logistics to attend as a group of Asian or Native American and both, right? To coordinate attending other events that are already happening in WSU's community or in Dayton, because there's so much happening all the time that maybe we just piggyback on that stuff. And then asynchronous programming. We now live in this sort of hybrid world since COVID hit, and so there are a few things I've been thinking of. I talked this morning about how there is sort of some ethnic studies on this campus, but there could always be more. And so one thing that I think about is potentially having these sort of asynchronous online learning modules that are like an introduction to Asian and Asian American studies, or to Indigenous studies, and that can be all online through the LMS, self-paced, and maybe have some touchstones a couple of times a semester. Once a group of students goes through that, maybe the students then can become leaders in those in-person things. It doesn't just have to be the domain of some kind of faculty or staff expert to sort of teach that, right? And that becomes an option even once you formalize it in the curriculum. Eventually, it becomes an option for students who may not be able to fit that in their schedules. And then, of course, we can take advantage of online programming that is open to the public. And so one example that just came up as I was putting this together is is this speaker series, Reimagining Asian and Indigenous Relationalities, that is organized by the Asian Settler Colonialism Caucus of the Association for Asian American Studies. And I know their poster is not easy to see or read here, but they had the first speaker the first week of October and then they have the next one coming up in November. But they're going to have those all through the spring, and I can imagine, just providing some context, giving folks like, oh, here's a little bit of the research that some of the people on the panel have done, giving that ahead of time, maybe a watch party to watch the panel happen on Zoom, or maybe folks do it on their own, and then the next day or right after, depending on the timing, some kind of debrief session where you kind of talk out, what did you hear there, what did you learn there, what kinds of questions did you have as you were listening to that. This is maybe sort of my nerd heart, right? But I take inspiration for this from the Women's Center at Miami. They have, the Women's Center actually houses most of the collection of any kind of women's studies, gender studies, sexuality studies books that the library owns. They're actually in the Women's Center space. And so that's actually how I first walked into the Women's Center, is because I needed to check out a book. And you just go there, and just like you're at the library, you can check out the book from there. And so to curate reading and resources collections that might be able to be housed at the center, relevant to Asian or Asian American studies or to Indigenous studies. And so sometimes that's going to bring people into the center who might not have come in there otherwise, or sometimes it's going to bring students who are hanging out in the center to the research, to those books. They might see a title and be interested in that and check it out, and then who knows what happens after that, right? And then I love book clubs as well. I don't know. You all asked me earlier about my programming ideas, and I said whatever you guys are interested in is what I'm interested in. But I'm interested in book clubs, that is true. But I don't know if students are also interested in that. But if you are, we can run one. And we do a modest one, like 1 or 2 books a semester. And then work with relevant academic programs to integrate those books into the curriculum that we're choosing. And then, of course, we want to make sure we have signature programming, the things that the campus knows we do and that they're excited for us to do almost on an annual basis. And so this kind of programming that has already been happening and continues to happen, like the Heritage and History Months programming for the relevant holidays. I talked this morning about having some kind of speaker series, and I would love to first highlight what folks on campus are doing, who people are, because we might not always know who's here or what they're doing, and that would be my first priority. And then the next thing would be to prioritize local and nearby folks, scholars, creatives, artists, activists, other community leaders, so that those tangible connections can form. I said this earlier, but it's wonderful when you can bring in sort of the national superstar in Indigenous studies, but those contacts can sometimes feel really fleeting, because 3 days later they get on a plane and go back to wherever they live. But if you are able to connect with the director of the Miami Center and know that he's only an hour away, then you can sort of actually form some kind of long-term connections or whatever it is with him. I think that ends up, I don't know, it can really change the whole direction of things. So those would be some of the ideas for signature programs, and I'm sure there are many more, but for me it's really, what are students going to be interested in attending? What are they going to be energetic about in terms of helping plan and raising marketing for us, right? So I am getting to the end of the presentation, just sort of a review of the things I talked about, the broad categories. And now I think I went a little bit over, but I hope we still have enough time for your questions.
We have plenty of time, because
Okay.
you have until 2:30, so I mean, we have
Oh,
time.
perfect. Okay, not even 2:15 yet, but that was the end of my the end of my slides. Fun fact, I'm obsessed with the Wright brothers, so that's why I put this picture on my last slide. But thank you so much for listening today, and I look forward to whatever conversation we're about to have. Thank you.
Any questions for Nicolyn? Thank you so much. This was wonderful information. I already feel excited. So,
I don't know if were there any questions from the
any
folks on
questions? Oh, yeah, we
WebEx?
can see
Any
them.
questions and, or anybody online can either put it in a chat or you can speak if you. We have working sound today, so if we can.
Or even, if
You
not
can hear the
questions,
online
just
people.
ideas. Yeah. Just anything you're thinking.
Well, if there are no questions, I thank you all.
Well, who might do you have Nicolyn, do you have questions for us?
Ask us questions too.
Well, I guess that was one question that I thought of after, like in the middle of presenting, was actually, I don't know what, you kept mentioning, several of you, that you were on the ANA council, and I don't actually know what that council does.
Okay.
So I'm like, I was describing an advisory board, and maybe that already exists.
It's not an advisory board.
Okay.
It's a student organization that is an umbrella student organization for the individual student organizations.
Okay.
They get their funding and all that through the ANA council, but the smaller orgs are underneath that.
Got it.
That it's to create the larger number to become a coordinating org.
Okay.
But there is not an advisory
Okay.
board.
I guess I would ask, what do you envision as you come in, your top 3 priorities would be in navigating a new space?
I think my top priority would be to just sort of listen and figure out what your priorities are. Because I know that, I think, right, it takes a long time. And we talked about this morning. You've been here a year and a half, and it took almost the whole first year to sort of just situate yourself within this community. So, so to sort of kind of, like, I have all these ideas, but I don't want to just come in and impose all those ideas. I want to make sure that I'm listening and we're collaborating on sort of what the priorities need to be. But in order to figure out the priorities, first you have to assess what does everything look like right now. And that would be the first priority, is that assessment, and then making a game plan. And then sort of, whenever you make a game plan, not only what is your end goal, but what are the steps you have to take to get there.
Thank you.
I have a question. So sometimes, like, obviously, like, microaggressions can occur, racism can occur. So, like, what are some of your experiences, like, advocating for students when things like that happen?
I think so many. I'm just like, which one do we start with? But I think a lot of times the first thing is to sort of figure out, does the student have a support system? So I've had this in you know, a student has signed up for my multi-ethnic lit class, and because it is open to first-year students to enroll in, and so to some degree, for a lot of the first-year students, I'm sort of the first, like, ethnic person in some kind of authority capacity that they have interacted with on a day-to-day basis at the school, you know. And so I might be the first person they come to about something. So I was actually, I mentioned this incident to Dr. Cheney earlier, but a student had experienced some kind of microaggression in the dorms and came to my office hours and told me about it. And then they wanted to email the president, like, I've been seeing this as a problem. It didn't just happen to me. I've heard it happen to several other students. And I said, hold on. There are lots and lots of people who have more sort of day-to-day power to deal with this than the president of the university does. And if you email the president will pass it off to one of them anyway. So let's make sure that you know who all of the people are. And so, and also that you have a support system that you can sort of work with, get some sort of, I don't know, build community with. So I said, oh, well, have you, interacted with the Asian Student Organization yet? And he said, oh, well, they had an event the first week of school, I went there. I said, well, let's email the president of that organization, and maybe you can sort of talk with some folks in there and get some support just to sort of figure out how other people have dealt with this, right? And then the director of the, it was called the First Gen and Multicultural Student Support Center. Their name is Peyton Liu, and I said, do you know Peyton? They said, oh, I remember Peyton did a presentation during orientation. I said, let's set up a meeting for you to talk with Peyton. Because Peyton is also Asian American, so Peyton has some experience on the personal side, but Peyton also, like, that is their job, right? To sort of help you navigate this in very clear ways, and can sort of connect you with Res Life resources for this and so on. And so sometimes it's sort of, it's kind of a triaging situation, right? To sort of get more information, find out what resources this student is already aware of, and then how I can connect them with them. And in this case, I said, Nick, I will go to this, let's schedule a meeting with Peyton. I can be there if you would like me to be there. And in the end, he went on his own. He didn't want me to be there, but it worked out really nicely. And but to just sort of send the emails or do the introductions is one of those ways. Go ahead.
So, Dr. Woodcock, so we spoke briefly about this earlier. So as it relates to student development and the like, what are you passionate about as it relates to student development? What brings you joy?
It's always mentoring, and really not just the activity of mentoring, right? But really seeing a student sort of go from first year, sometimes sort of flailing around, figuring out this overwhelming new environment that is college, to watching them graduate, and then, or even now, so my first mentee in that program, she graduated in 2017. So now 5 years later, to sort of see what she's doing. She's in the Peace Corps, so to sort of see how she's continuing to grow, right? It's really to think about and celebrate all of that growth, all of that success, and to sort of, the hard part of mentoring is helping students navigate the microaggressions that they come up with on a daily basis, and sometimes it's the really big struggles, like when COVID hit, and for some of these students, it was, their families lost jobs, and they weren't sure if they were going to be able to come back to campus the next semester, and those sorts of things. But to be able to not only help people through that, but to also see in the long range sort of how everything develops down the line, that brings me so much joy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank all of you.
And I just want to remind people too, we have link for these open forums, so please fill those out for us.